Padai, the voices of heaven, a peasant girl's calling in the small village of Domremy, surrounded by the whispering fields of France. A girl named Jeanne d'Arc was born in 1412. The 100 Years' War had torn her homeland apart, leaving behind nothing but ashes and despair. Her parents were simple farmers, believers in God, but burdened by the endless conflict between France and England. The villagers spoke often of soldiers, raids, and the cruel taxes that bled them dry. From a young age, Jeanne felt something stirring inside her, a pull that others could not see or understand. When the church bells rang, she would stop whatever she was doing and listen, as if the sound carried secrets only she could hear. France was fractured, its king powerless, its crown disputed. God held only a shadow of authority, while the English occupied vast lands. The people prayed for deliverance, but faith alone could not stop the enemy's march. In their suffering, they believed that only a miracle could save France. One day, when Jeanne was 13, she knelt by a field of blooming lilies. The world around her seemed still. No wind, no bird, only silence. And in that silence, a voice spoke. Clear, calm, holy. Jeanne, it said, be good and go off into church. Startled, she looked around, but no one was there. Then a light appeared, radiant, soft, almost blinding. From within, it stepped figures she would later call Saint Michael, Saint Aucassin, and Saint Margaret. They spoke of France, of suffering, of God's will. Go, they said, and help the Dauphin reclaim his crown. Jeanne trembled, unable to comprehend. She was a farmer's daughter, not a soldier, not a noble, not anyone important. Yet the voices filled her with a strange and unshakable peace. She knew, deep down, that what she heard was not madness, it was destiny. Days turned into weeks, and the voices returned again and again. Each time, they became clearer, firmer, impossible to ignore. Jeanne began to keep her secret. She feared what others would think, that they might call her possessed or delusional. But the call only grew louder. You must go to the Dauphin, the saints urged. God has chosen you to lead his army. The idea was unthinkable. A girl leading men into battle. Yet Jeanne's heart no longer belonged to fear. Her nights became filled with visions. Angels descending from heaven, banners of lilies fluttering over battlefields, and a crown being placed upon a king's head. Each morning, she woke with renewed conviction. Her mission was clear, even if the path was not. When English raiders burned nearby villages, Jeanne wept. How long must we suffer? She whispered into the night. The voices replied, until you act. Those words became the seed of revolution. She began to speak quietly of her visions to a priest she trusted. He listened, half in awe, half in disbelief. The saints speak to me, Jeanne said softly. They command me to save France. The priest crossed himself and stared into her eyes and found no madness there, only fire. Rumors spread quickly through Domremy. Some villagers mocked her, calling her the holy fool. Others watched with curiosity, for when Jeanne prayed, it was as if the heavens leaned closer. Her parents feared for her safety. You speak of kings and battles? Her father warned. You're a girl? They will laugh. Or worse. Jeanne simply replied, God does not laugh at his will. And there was nothing more he could say. The voices gave her a sign. She would recognize the true heir to the French throne by a secret mark. That knowledge gave her courage. At 16, Jeanne made her decision. She would leave her village and find the Dauphin. She shaved her head, bound her hair, and dressed as a man. The disguise was both protection and defiance. 2 men from the village, moved by her faith, agreed to escort her. Together, they set out through war-torn France, toward the roads were haunted by soldiers, bandits, and death. But Jeanne walked without fear, clutching a small wooden cross beneath her cloak. Etibo! Cadi Russi! She sought an audience with Robert de Baudricourt, the local commander. He laughed when she claimed God had sent her to save France. You? He scoffed. A girl who thinks she can fight the English? Jeanne met his gaze, calm and steady. "Not I," she said, "but God through me." Her words silenced the room. For weeks, she was kept waiting. Soldiers mocked her, yet she never wavered. She tended to the wounded, prayed with the fearful, and spoke gently to all. Slowly, whispers began to change. Perhaps the girl was truly blessed. One evening, Bodrica's wife came to him. "I have seen her pray," she said. "If there is faith left in this land, it lives in that girl." Reluctantly, Baudricourt agreed to test her. He sent a message to the Dauphin. A strange girl claimed she carried divine orders. To everyone's surprise, a reply came. The Dauphin would receive her. Jean fell to her knees and thanked God. Her mission was only beginning. She was given a horse, armor, and a sword. When she held the weapon, she did not feel pride. She felt responsibility. On the road to Chinin, her escort grew uneasy. "If you are wrong," one said, "we will all hang for treason." Jean replied quietly, "If I am wrong, may God judge me, but I am not wrong." Her conviction was unbreakable. They traveled by night, hiding from English patrols. Rain soaked their cloaks, but Jean never complained. She prayed aloud as they rode, her voice a song of faith through the darkness. The men began to follow her prayers without realizing it. At dawn, they reached the Loire River. Mist rose over the water like a veil between heaven and earth. "There," Jean said, pointing ahead. "Beyond those hills lies the king." The journey that began in a village field was now nearing destiny. When they entered Chinin, the city was buzzing with tension. France's fate hung on whispers and alliances. Jean was led to the royal palace, a grand hall filled with courtiers and nobles. They sneered at her patched clothes and boyish appearance. But Jean walked forward with the grace of a queen. Every eye followed her. The Dauphin decided to test her faith. He hid among his courtiers to see if she could find him. Jean entered, scanning the crowd. Without hesitation, she walked straight to the disguised prince and knelt. "My king," she said, "God bless you and grant you your rightful crown." Gasps filled the hall. Charles stood frozen. "How did you know?" he asked. Jean smiled. "My voices told me who you were." The court erupted, some in awe, others in disbelief. Yet the Dauphin could not deny what he felt in that moment. For the first time in years, hope flickered in his heart. Perhaps this girl truly was sent by God. Jean was questioned by priests, scholars, and nobles. They sought to expose her as a fraud, but she answered every question with calm wisdom. "If God has chosen me," she told them, "no man can unchoose me." Her faith left them speechless. The Dauphin finally agreed to grant her command, a small force to lift the siege of Orleans. Jean bowed her head in gratitude. As she donned armor for the first time, her attendants noticed her serenity. "You do not seem afraid," one said. Jean replied, "I fear only failing God." Her words spread like wildfire through the camp. Soldiers began to speak of her as the Maid, a symbol, a miracle, a beacon in France's darkest night. Her banner was white, bearing the names of Jesus and Mary. When it fluttered above the troops, men wept openly. Jean led them in prayer before every march. Her presence alone seemed to banish despair. Priests blessed the army, believing divine favor was finally upon them. Even skeptics began to kneel. Before they left, Jean visited the Dauphin one last time. "You will be crowned at Reims," she told him, "for God has so willed it." The Dauphin smiled faintly. "Then I pray your faith proves stronger than France's fear." Jean rode out at dawn. The city gates opened, and sunlight bathed her armor in gold. Peasants knelt as she passed, whispering prayers. "She is sent from heaven," they said. The road to Orleans was long and dangerous, yet Jean's voice never wavered. Her men sang hymns as they marched, inspired by her courage. Hope traveled with them like a fire spreading across the land. Scouts brought grim news. The English forces were entrenched and merciless. But Jean only said, "God will open a way." Each night, she prayed beneath the stars, her sword by her side, her banner close to her heart. Some said they saw light around her when she prayed. Others felt peace simply standing near her. By the time they neared Orleans, the name Jean the Maid had already become legend. Her arrival was awaited like the coming of dawn. As the city's battered walls came into view, Jean raised her banner high. "Be not afraid," she cried. "God fights with us!" The weary defenders on the walls shouted her name. Bells rang, and hope returned to a city on its knees. That night, as she looked upon the besieged towers, Jean whispered to heaven, "I am here, Lord. Do with me as you will." The wind carried her words into the darkness, and somewhere beyond, the unseen voices answered softly, "Courage, daughter of France." Part 2, The Maiden and the Crown. France's last hope, the city of Orleans, was on the brink of collapse when Jean arrived. The people, starved and hopeless, saw in her not merely a warrior, but a sign from God himself. She rode through the gates, carrying her white banner, the golden light of dawn reflecting off her armor, and the crowd erupted in cries of "Vive Rhaepseta." "Long live the Maid!" Inside the walls, commanders doubted her at first. Hardened men, weary from endless defeats, could not fathom that salvation might come from a teenage girl. Yet, as Jean spoke, her words seemed to cut through their disbelief. "I do not command you," she said softly. "God does." Her conviction disarmed them more than any blade could. She walked the ramparts, blessing soldiers, comforting the wounded, and inspiring even the most broken among them to rise once more. Every time she raised her banner, despair retreated. The English siege had tightened around the city for months. They mocked the idea of a virgin saint leading peasants, calling her the Witch of Armagnac. But their laughter hid unease. Rumors of divine visions unnerved even the cruelest among them. Jean did not waste time with fear. She studied the enemy positions, planned her assaults with precision, and demanded courage from every man under her command. "You must fight as if Christ himself rides beside you," she declared. On the morning of the first assault, she mounted her horse and lifted her banner high. Arrows rained from the sky, striking her armor, but she rode forward untouched. To the soldiers who followed, it seemed heaven itself shielded her. The French surged across the drawbridge, their spirits transformed by her presence. Jean's voice carried over the chaos, clear, commanding, divine. "Push forward. The Lord is with us." The English lines faltered under the sudden onslaught. Jean's banner rose above the smoke like a guiding flame. It was said that, wherever she appeared, men forgot pain and fear. When a captain fell beside her, Jean dismounted and cradled his head in her arms. "Do not fear," she whispered. "Your soul goes to God." Then she rose and charged again. The battle raged 4 hours. The French fought with newfound ferocity, and by nightfall, the English had been forced to retreat from one of their strongest bastions. Bells tolled across Orleans, echoing like a song of resurrection. Jean knelt in the mud, tears streaming down her face. "Not to me, Lord, but to you be the glory." Her armor was dented, her banner torn, but her spirit was unbreakable. In the following days, she led assault after assault, pushing back the enemy with divine precision. Even skeptics now called her the Angel of Orleans on May 7th. During the final push against the English fortress at Les Tourelles, Jean was struck by an arrow between her neck and shoulder. She staggered but did not fall. Her soldiers panicked, believing their saint had been slain. Yet moments later, Jean returned, the arrow pulled from her flesh, her blood staining the white banner she carried. "I will not retreat!" she cried. "Take the bridge. God commands it." Her courage ignited them like wildfire. The French stormed the fortress, driving the English out in disarray. The siege that had strangled Orleans for 7 months ended that night in triumph. When dawn broke, Jean rode through the city gates, a banner fluttering above her head. The people wept and knelt, calling her deliverer of France. In the royal court, news of her victory spread like divine rumor. The Dauphin, still uncertain of his destiny, summoned her to his side once more. Jean entered the throne room, her armor still bearing the scars of battle. "My king," she said, "the road to Reims lies open." "There! God commands that you shall be crowned." The Dauphin hesitated. The war was far from over, and the English still held many strongholds. Yet Jean's words were filled with the certainty of prophecy. "You doubt not me," she said, "but him who sent me." trust, and France shall rise. Her eyes held a light that silenced all argument. Against the counsel of many, Charles agreed to march toward Reims. It was an act of faith, not strategy, but faith was what France had forgotten and what Jean restored. Along the journey, she became a living legend. Villages lined the roads to see her pass, children gathered flowers for her horse, and even old soldiers crossed themselves as she rode by. To the weary nation, she was no longer a mere girl. She was the embodiment of divine hope, the heartbeat of France itself. At every stop, she prayed in chapels, wept before crucifixes, and gave food to the poor. Her humility was as powerful as her sword. English spies followed her movements, desperate to uncover her secrets. But Jean had no secrets, only faith, pure and terrifying in its simplicity. By June 1429, her army reached Troyes, a city loyal to the English crown. Its gates were closed, its people fearful. Jean ordered a siege. Within days, Troyes surrendered without bloodshed. The people opened the gates, claiming they had seen a vision of the Virgin hovering above her banner. Each victory added to her mystique, but Jean never glorified herself. "It is not I who do these things," she said, "but the Lord who moves through me." Her words became scripture among soldiers. Men carried small crosses into battle, convinced she was the chosen savior foretold in prophecy. As they drew near Reims, the Dauphin's heart wavered once more. "What if the English strike us before we arrive?" he asked. Jean only smiled. "Then they will strike God himself." On July 16, 1429, they reached the gates of Reims. The cathedral loomed tall, golden lights spilling through its stained glass like divine fire. The archbishop received them in awe, declaring that heaven itself had guided this moment. The coronation was set for the next day. Jean stood beside the Dauphin as the sacred oil was brought forth. The air was thick with incense and tears. As the crown touched his head, Jean knelt, her eyes glistening. "Now," she whispered, "the will of God is fulfilled." Charles VII was now king, but it was Jean the people celebrated. She had done what no general, no noble, no priest could. She had made France believe again. Yet even as the king basked in glory, the shadow of politics grew long. Some courtiers whispered that Jean's influence was dangerous. "She listens not to men," they muttered. "Only two voices no one else can hear." The church watched her closely. Miracles inspired awe, but they also bred suspicion. Was she guided by heaven or by heresy? Jean sensed the growing unease but ignored it. Her mission was not yet complete. She begged the king to continue fighting, to reclaim Paris from the English. The king hesitated again, content now with his crown. "We must rest," he said. Jean's heart sank. "France does not rest," she pleaded. "The enemy still walks her soil." But her words fell on deaf ears. Frustrated, she led her troops without royal sanction, determined to drive the English from Paris. Her faith, though unbroken, was now at odds with royal caution. The assault on Paris was brutal. Jean led from the front as always, her banner blazing amid the storm of arrows. But the attack failed. She was wounded in the thigh, dragged from the field as blood soaked her armor. It was the first time she had tasted defeat. As she lay beneath a tattered tent, she prayed not for victory, but for understanding. "Lord," she whispered, "have I failed you, or have they failed me?" The voices were silent that night. Perhaps heaven mourned with her. Despite the loss, Jean's spirit did not fade. She continued to fight skirmishes, protect villages, and rally the faithful. But the court had grown distant, her king now cautious of his saint. The English, however, had not forgotten her. To them, she was a symbol that had to be destroyed. They placed a bounty on her head alive, if possible, for they wished to unmask her witchcraft before the world. Jean knew the danger, but she refused to hide. "If it be God's will that I should suffer," she said, "then I will suffer gladly." In early 1430, she marched toward Compiègne to defend the city from an English siege. It would be her final campaign. Trapped outside the gates during an ambush, she ordered her men to retreat. She turned her horse to hold the line, shielding them as arrows flew. but the drawbridge closed before she could cross. Her comrades watched in horror as Burgundian soldiers surrounded her. Jean fought like a cornered lion, striking with her sword until it broke in her hand, but sheer numbers overwhelmed her. "Surrender, Maid of Orleans!" they shouted. She dropped her blade, her eyes raised to the sky. "God's will be done!" She was dragged from her horse, bound, and taken prisoner. The miracle girl who had delivered France was now in chains. Word of her capture spread like wildfire. The people wept, but the court remained silent. The king she had crowned made no move to rescue her. The English rejoiced, seeing in her capture not just victory, but vengeance. "Now we shall see if her voices save her," they sneered. Jean was sold to the English by her Burgundian captors for 10,000 livres. A prophet turned prisoner, a saint betrayed by men she had saved. She was taken to Rouen, where her trial would decide not her fate alone, but the soul of France itself. Her captors feared her, not her sword, but her words. So they stripped her of armor, of dignity, and placed her in a cold, damp cell guarded by men who mocked her. Still, she prayed. Each morning began with whispered psalms. Each night ended with tears and faith intertwined. When they brought her before the tribunal, she stood tall in her tattered clothes. Bishops, scholars, and inquisitors lined the hall, ready to condemn. They accused her of heresy, witchcraft, and pride. "Do your voices still speak?" they asked. Jane replied calmly, "Yes, and they tell me to answer you no more than God wills." Her composure infuriated them. They sought to break her with threats of torture, but she only said, "Even if you tear me limb from limb, my soul belongs to God." For weeks they questioned her, trying to twist her words, but her faith remained an unshakable fortress. When asked if she believed she was in God's grace, Jean answered, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may he keep me there." Even her judges were awed by the purity of her reply. Yet they had already decided her fate. The verdict was sealed long before the trial began. In May 1431, after months of imprisonment, Jean was condemned as a heretic. Her only crime was believing too fiercely. On the morning of her execution, she asked for a cross. A sympathetic guard fashioned one from sticks and handed it to her. She kissed it tenderly. As she was led to the marketplace, the crowd gathered, some in reverence, others in cruelty. Jean climbed the wooden platform without trembling. The wind tugged at her hair, and the sky above was gray as ash. "I did not do this for myself," she said softly. "I did this for France." A priest held a crucifix before her as the flames were lit. Jean's eyes never left it. Her final words echoed above the crackling fire. "Jesus! Jesus!" The smoke rose, and the Maid of Orleans was gone. But in death, she became immortal. Even her executioners wept, realizing too late they had killed something sacred. Her ashes were cast into the Seine, yet her spirit flowed with the river through every village she had once saved. Years later, the same church that condemned her would declare her innocent. Centuries after, she would be canonized as Saint Joan of Arc. But in that moment, all that remained was silence. The silence left when heaven's voice departs. France mourned, but the seeds she had planted did not die. Her courage had given birth to a nation's faith. The king she had crowned ruled because she had believed in him when no one else did. Her banner, now tattered and bloodstained, was enshrined as a relic of divine defiance. Generations would whisper her name in prayer before battle, believing that the maid still watched from above. Jean's story was not one of tragedy, but of transcendence, proof that faith, even when betrayed, never perishes. Her life became a bridge between heaven and earth, between mortality and miracle. And though she burned in this world, her flame lit the next. For the girl who heard voices was never silenced. Her voice became France itself. Part 3. The fire and the sword, the battles of Joan, the victory at Rheims, had made Joan of Arc a symbol of divine will. But to her, it was only the beginning. France still lay in ruins, and every victory came shadowed by doubt. She knew that as long as the English held their fortresses, peace would remain a dream, whispered to the wind. The newly crowned King Charles VII basked in the adoration that Jean's victories had earned him. Yet he hesitated to press forward. His advisors whispered of truces and negotiations. Jean's heart burned with frustration. God had given France its chance, and hesitation was sin. While men argue, she said, the enemy strengthens. She begged the king to reclaim Paris, the beating heart of the realm. But court politics moved slower than any army. Jean turned once more to the soldiers, the men who had bled beside her at Orleans. They still believed, still followed her white banner. She gathered them in secret and prepared to march north. Before departing, she knelt in the Cathedral of Reims, praying before the same altar where Charles had been crowned. If I must fight without their blessing, then so be it. You, Lord, are my commander. The march toward Paris was long and uncertain. The countryside, scarred by years of war, whispered her name as she passed. Peasants left their huts to watch her ride by the Maiden, the savior, the legend they had come to worship. But the English were waiting. They had regrouped under their cunning generals, determined to destroy the girl who had humiliated them. On the outskirts of Paris, Jean's scouts reported enemy movement. Her officers urged caution. She ignored them. Caution is for those without faith, she declared. The battle began at dawn, fog curling over the fields. Jean led from the front, as always, her banner glinting like a shard of sunlight through the mist. The clash of steel filled the air. Jean rode through the chaos, shouting prayers instead of commands. Soldiers swore they saw arrows bend away from her, as though heaven itself deflected death. But even miracles cannot last forever. A crossbow bolt struck her thigh, knocking her from her horse. Blood soaked her armor, and for the first time, she faltered. Her men rushed to her side, but she waved them away. "Do not pity me," she said through clenched teeth. "Fight on." They carried her to the rear, but the attack faltered without her. By sunset, the French retreated, leaving hundreds dead upon the field. Jean lay in her tent, pale and fevered. Her faith did not waver, but her spirit was heavy. "Lord," she whispered, "was it my pride that led us here?" The answer, if it came, was lost in silence. She recovered, but the wound never fully healed. Paris remained in enemy hands, and Jean's influence began to fade. The king, wary of her growing legend, listened more to his advisors than to his saint. "They fear what they cannot control," she told her squire. "But they forget. I was never theirs to control." Winter came, harsh and bitter. Jean continued to fight small skirmishes, defending towns and escorting supply lines. Each victory was a flicker against an ocean of darkness. She prayed constantly, her faith the only warmth left to her. "If you ask for my life, I will give it," she said one night. "Only do not let France fall." The spring of 1430 brought new dangers. Burgundy, once neutral, allied with England. Their combined forces threatened Compiègne, one of France's last strongholds. Jean knew she must act. Against orders, she rode to the city's defense with a small band of loyal soldiers. The people of Compiègne greeted her with tears and cheers. "The Maid has come!" they cried. Hope once more filled the air. Jean inspected the defenses, slept little, and prayed often. "We shall hold," she promised. "God has not forsaken us." On May 23rd, 1430, the enemy launched their attack. Jean led the countercharge, her banner cutting through the smoke. The French pushed forward, driving the Burgundians back toward the river. Victory seemed close until a trumpet sounded behind them. The drawbridge to the city had closed, sealing Jean and her men outside. It was a fatal mistake, or perhaps betrayal. Surrounded, Jean fought like a warrior of heaven, her sword flashing with desperate fury. "Yield!" cried her enemies. "Never!" she shouted. But even saints bleed. She was dragged from her horse, pinned to the ground, and disarmed. The banner fell from her grasp, trampled into the mud. The enemy bound her hands in chains. "The witch is ours!" they cried. laughing. Jean's soldiers tried to break through, but the gates stayed shut. She was carried away, her white armor gleaming in the fading light like a ghost. As she was led through the enemy camp, men jeered and spat, calling her a heretic, a whore, a fraud. Jean walked with her head high, her lips moving in silent prayer. "You think to shame me," she said softly, "but I belong to no man." Her captors brought her before the Duke of Burgundy. He looked at her with curiosity, like one examining a relic. "So," he said, "this is the girl who thinks she speaks with God." Jean met his gaze. "I do not think," she answered. "I know." He smiled cruelly. "We shall see what God says when England pays for you." She was thrown into a cold cell, her armor stripped away. For the first time since Orleans, she was utterly alone. The nights were long and brutal. Her guards mocked her prayers, but she never stopped whispering them. Word of her capture spread through France. Some despaired, others refused to believe it. The king she had crowned made no attempt to ransom her. Jean felt that abandonment deeply. "Even my king has forgotten me," she said one night, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "But my true king never will." The Burgundians sold her to the English for 10,000 livres, blood money for a living miracle. Her journey to Rouen was slow and humiliating. Crowds gathered to see her pass, some crossing themselves, others hurling curses. "Witch!" they cried. Jean only smiled faintly. "If they call me so," she murmured, "then let them, for Christ was called worse." In Rouen, she was imprisoned in a stone tower, guarded by men who feared her and desired her in equal measure. Chains bound her to the wall at night, yet she still managed to kneel and pray. Her faith became her only armor. The English clergy gathered to prepare her trial. They would not simply execute her, they would destroy her reputation, her sanctity, her very name. Their plan was to paint her as a heretic, and a pawn of the devil. To kill her faith, they had to first corrupt it. When she was brought before her judges, she appeared frail but radiant. The white light of belief still glowed in her eyes. "Do you claim that God speaks to you?" one bishop asked. Jean replied calmly, "Yes, as surely as I see you now." The court murmured, scandalized. "What proof do you have?" another demanded. "The proof," Jean said, "is that I have done what no man could." Her words struck like lightning, but her enemies were resolute. They would twist truth until it broke. Over weeks, they interrogated her relentlessly, asking the same questions again and again, hoping to trap her. But Jean answered with grace and intelligence far beyond her years. Her judges began to fear her, not her sword, but her certainty. They accused her of vanity for wearing men's clothing. "I wear what protects me," she said, "for the guards you give me are not angels." Each reply cut deeper than any blade. Her faith was not arrogance. It was light in a room built of shadows. The inquisitors whispered among themselves. "She is either saint or sorceress," one said. "Either way," another answered, "she must burn." As the weeks dragged on, Jean grew weaker. The cold and hunger gnawed at her, yet she refused to renounce her visions. "If I deny them," she said, "I deny God himself." The clergy pressed harder. "If you confess, your life will be spared." Jean looked up at the crucifix on the wall. "Then my life will not be mine." They threatened torture. She trembled but did not yield. "Do with me what you will," she said, "but my soul is not yours to touch." Even her guards, once cruel, began to respect her. One offered her bread in secret. Another crossed himself when she prayed. The English commanders, frustrated by her endurance, ordered her sentence prepared. Jean's final trial was held in the great hall of Rouen Castle. The crowd was silent as she was led in chains before the tribunal. "You claim to have been sent by God," the bishop declared. "Will you now deny it?" Jean's voice, though faint, carried through the hall. "If I deny what God has done, then I would condemn my own soul. I will not." The verdict was forgone. The judges nodded to one another. She was condemned to death by fire. Jean bowed her head and whispered a prayer. "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Her final night was spent in solitude. She wept, Not for herself, but for those who had lost faith. When dawn came, she asked for a cross. A guard, moved by pity, carved one from wood and gave it to her. Jean kissed it, clutching it close as she was led to the marketplace. The crowd had gathered thousands of faces, some tearful, some The executioner trembled as he bound her to the stake. "Be brave, child," a priest whispered. "You go to paradise." Jean smiled faintly. "I was never afraid of death," she said, "only of failing him." As the torch was lit, the flames licked at her robe. She lifted her eyes to heaven. "Jesus, Jesus." Her voice echoed until the smoke swallowed it. When the fire died, only ashes remained, but among them, her heart was found unburned. Even the executioner wept. "We have killed a saint," he said. News of her death spread across Europe. Some rejoiced, others mourned, but none could ignore her. The king she had crowned remained silent, haunted by guilt. France, though bloodied, began to rise again. Jean's sacrifice had kindled something no army could extinguish. The English soon began to falter. The very land seemed to reject them, as if guided by her unseen hand. Years later, the same church that condemned her declared her innocent. Her name became holy, her life a beacon for all who believed in impossible things. Centuries after, she was canonized as Saint Joan of Arc, the girl who defied kings and conversed with angels. Her legend endured through wars and revolutions. Artists painted her, poets wept for her, nations prayed to her. Jeanne d'Arc, a name that transcended death, fire, and time itself. The flames that once consumed her became the eternal light of faith. In villages across France, peasants spoke of seeing her spirit in times of despair. "The maid walks with us still," they said. Her story crossed oceans, inspiring freedom fighters, revolutionaries, and dreamers. She became not just France's saint, but humanity's symbol of courage and conviction. Every time the oppressed rose against tyranny, her name was whispered in their hearts. For Joan of Arc was never truly burned, her faith lives on in every soul that dares to believe. And though the ashes of Rouen long faded into dust, her flame still burns, undying, eternal, divine. Part 4. The Betrayal. Captured by faith and fire, the capture of Joan of Arc sent tremors through France. A silence heavier than morning fell across the land. The girl who once commanded armies now sat in a cold, damp cell, her hands bound, her fate written by men who feared what they could not control. The English and their Burgundian allies had achieved what no sword could. They had broken the spirit of France by taking its heart. Yet even behind iron bars, Joan's presence unsettled her captors. Soldiers whispered that strange light filled her cell when she prayed. Some swore that they heard soft voices echoing in the night. The same voices she claimed had guided her. They called her a witch, a heretic, a fraud, but their hatred only revealed their fear. The Duke of Burgundy sold her to the English for 10,000 francs, a sum so vast it was whispered that the devil himself had paid it. When the transaction was complete, the Duke refused to look her in the eyes, for in her calm gaze, he saw something divine, something his treachery could never silence. In Rouen, her chains were tightened. She was placed in a tower, guarded day and night by rough men who leered when she prayed. Yet she prayed still for them, for France, even for those who would burn her. Her trial was orchestrated before it began, a performance of power disguised as justice. The English clergy, led by Bishop Pierre Cauchin, sought not truth, but condemnation. They feared that her death alone was not enough. They had to break her name, her faith, her very soul. Each day, she was led into the great hall of Rouen Castle, chains clinking, her eyes bright, despite the shadows beneath them. The judges questioned her endlessly about her visions, her armor, her belief that God had chosen her. Every word she spoke was twisted, every silence used against her. "Do you claim that God speaks to you directly?" the bishop demanded. Jean met his gaze. "Yes," she said, "and he speaks still." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Her courage angered them. It made their cruelty seem small. "If your voices are from heaven," one judge sneered, "why have they abandoned you now?" Jean smiled faintly. "Perhaps it is you who no longer hear?" Her answers infuriated them. They accused her of sorcery, of vanity, of pride. You wear men's clothes, they spat. You defy nature and God. Jean replied softly, I wear what keeps me safe. You would not dress as a lamb among wolves. The hall fell silent. Even her accusers could not deny her logic. But the trial continued. 4 weeks. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear gnawed at her. Yet her faith never dimmed. When asked if she was in God's grace, she answered, If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may He keep me there. The brilliance of her words stunned the scholars. It was an answer no trap could ensnare. Behind closed doors, English commanders raged. She speaks like a prophet, one growled. Then make her sound like a heretic, Calcine replied. They forged documents, misquoted testimony, and spread rumors. Her courage was recast as madness. Her holiness was twisted into delusion. Through it all, Jean clung to her faith. I was born for this, she whispered to her guards. The fire will not destroy me, it will free me. One night, a guard asked her, trembling, Do you not fear death? Jean smiled sadly. I fear only sin. Her simplicity disarmed even the cruelest among them. A few began to secretly protect her from humiliation, but none could save her from what was coming. On May 24th, 1431, they led her to the cemetery of St. Wouin, where a scaffold had been built. The threat of the stake loomed over her as Bishop Calchin demanded she recant. Sign this, he said, shoving a parchment before her. Deny your visions, and you shall live. Jean hesitated. The crowd pressed forward, pleading for her to save herself. For a moment, she faltered. Her hand trembled as she signed. Not from fear, but from heartbreak. In that moment, she betrayed not God, but her own soul. She was returned to her cell, humiliated, stripped of her faith's armor. But when the voices returned to her that night, they were not angry, only sorrowful. You did what you thought you must, they said, but now you must return to your path. Jean wept, begging forgiveness. The next morning, she stood before her judges again. Her voice was calm, her heart unshaken. I withdraw my recantation, she declared. What I have said before was out of fear. My voices are from God, and all I have done was by His will. The room erupted in fury. Bishop Cuchian struck the table. Then you are condemned. Jean nodded. I expected no less. Her sentence was set, death by fire. Yet she faced it with peace, as though she were being called home rather than destroyed. The morning of May 30th, 1431, dawned cold and gray. Jean was led from her cell in a coarse white gown, her hair shorn close. The crowd that once cheered her now gathered to watch her die. Some came out of pity, others from curiosity, but none could look away. As she walked, she asked for a cross. A soldier, moved by compassion, fashioned one from a stick and handed it to her. She kissed it and held it to her chest. Keep it before my eyes until the end, she told the priest beside her. At the marketplace of Rouen, the pyre waited, a towering structure of wood and rope, the smell of pitch thick in the air. She mounted the platform without trembling. The executioner avoided her eyes. Bishop, she called softly, I die through you. The man flinched, guilt washing across his face. The ropes were tied around her waist and legs. The cross remained clutched in her bound hands. Jesus! Jesus! She whispered as the torch was brought forth. The flames caught quickly, rising around her like golden wings. The crowd gasped, many falling to their knees. Through the roar of the fire, her voice rang out clear. My voices were of God. All that I did was by His command. Smoke filled the air, choking the cries of those who wept. But Jean did not scream. Her eyes were fixed on the heavens until the very last breath left her lips. When the fire died, the executioner found something he could not explain. Her heart untouched by flame. We have burned a saint, he said, collapsing to his knees. The English ordered her ashes scattered into the Seine, fearing that relics of her body would become holy symbols. But even that could not erase her. News of her death spread across France like wildfire. Soldiers laid down their arms and wept. Peasants built shrines from stones and candles. In the royal court, King Charles VII received the news in silence. The woman who had crowned him now lay in ashes, abandoned by the very crown she had restored. Yet within that silence, guilt took root, a guilt that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The war raged on, but the tide had already turned. Jean's spirit seemed to move with every French victory that followed. The English began to lose ground. Their morale cracked under the weight of something unseen, as if divine justice marched beside every French soldier. Town by town, fortress by fortress, France was the people whispered, "It is the Maid who fights with us still." Decades later, the church reopened her case. Witnesses came forward, priests confessed their shame, and even her enemies admitted their deceit. In 1456, 25 years after her death, Jeanne d'Arc was declared innocent. Her name was restored, her faith vindicated. But justice delayed is never justice undone. The flames that took her body had already lit an eternal torch. Generations passed, yet her story refused to fade. Artists painted her visions, poets sang her courage, nations drew strength from her defiance. She became a symbol, not merely of France, but of conviction itself. For every soul that stood alone against the world, her spirit whispered, "Stand. Believe. Burn if you must, but do not yield." Centuries later, in 1920, the Vatican canonized her as Saint Joan of Arc. Bells rang across Europe. France wept and prayed, not in sorrow, but in reverence. From peasant girl to warrior, from heretic to saint, her journey became the very map of faith and fire. And though time moved on, her legend remained alive, etched in every flame that refuses to die. To this day, pilgrims visit Domremy, the village of her birth, where her spirit still seems to linger among the fields. In Reims, the cathedral she reclaims stands tall, its bells echoing her triumph across centuries. In Rouen, where she was burned, a white church rises from the ashes, shaped like a flame reaching toward the heavens. The irony is divine. The place of her death now bears the shape of a resurrection. The world remembers Joan not for her victories, but for her defiance, for her faith that transcended death itself. She reminds us that belief, once kindled, cannot be extinguished, not by sword, not by flame, not by time. Joan's story endures because it speaks to something timeless, the human soul's refusal to bow before the impossible. Her courage was not born of strength but of surrender. Surrender to something greater than fear. She was mocked, betrayed, and destroyed, yet she became eternal. Her voice, once silenced by smoke, now thunders through history. In every act of faith against tyranny, her spirit breathes again. In every girl who dares to dream beyond her station, Jeanne walks beside her. In every believer who stands alone against doubt, her whisper returns. Do not be afraid. God is with you. The fire that consumed her was never her end. It was her coronation. For she who lit the path for kings now sits among saints, crowned not by men, but by heaven itself. Joan of Arc's life reminds us that faith is not gentle. It is fierce, unyielding, and costly. She fought for her country, but died for her truth. And that truth, that divine, unshakable truth, still burns in every heart that refuses to give up. The world has known many heroes, but few martyrs whose fire continues to illuminate the path centuries later. In her ashes was born a new France. In her faith was born a new hope for all who believe. She proved that conviction can be armor and sacrifice the sharpest sword. Her story teaches us that the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet resolve of the soul. For though she fell by the flames, she rose in spirit higher than any crown. Joan of Arc, the girl who burned but never truly died. Her legend whispers still, carried on the wind that passes over Rouen, across the fields of Domremy, into every heart that listens. And if you listen closely, you can still hear her prayer, faint but eternal, for France, for faith, for God. Part V. Legacy of the Flame. The immortal saint of France, the flames of Rouen died centuries ago, yet their light never faded. Across time, the spirit of Joan of Arc continued to burn, fierce, defiant, unbreakable. Her ashes, scattered in the Seine, became one with the waters of France, flowing through every river, every soul who dared to dream beyond their station. In the years that followed her death, France changed. The 100 Years' War began to crumble beneath its own exhaustion. The English retreated, their hold over French soil slipping like sand through their fingers. The people whispered that it was Jean who had cursed them, that her spirit marched with the French soldiers, unseen but ever present, driving them toward victory. Her name, once spoken with scorn, became a secret prayer. Mothers told their children, "Be brave, like the Maid." Farmers carved her initials into wooden doors for protection. Even soldiers carried small crosses, claiming they were blessed in her memory. King Charles VII, the man she had crowned at Reims, lived with the guilt of having done nothing to save her. Though he ruled, he was haunted by her voice, her eyes, her faith that never wavered. He sent messengers to Rouen, demanding records of her trial. He read each accusation, each twisted question, and finally understood that she had been condemned not by God, but by politics. 25 years after her death, he ordered a retrial, a trial not of punishment, but of redemption. It was known as the rehabilitation of Jeanne d'Arc. Witnesses came forward from every corner of France. Priests, soldiers, villagers, all who had known her. They wept as they spoke, describing her kindness, her bravery, her unwavering faith. One soldier told the court, "I saw her kneel in prayer before battle." The air around her glowed as though touched by heaven. Even those who once doubted her now confessed their shame. "We feared her holiness," one bishop admitted. "We mistook her strength for pride." The retrial lasted 7 years. And when it ended, the verdict was clear. Jeanne was innocent. The church declared that her original trial was corrupted by deceit and malice. The judges wept as they read the final words. "We proclaim Jeanne the Maid pure, faithful, and true." France rejoiced. Bells rang from every cathedral. The people gathered in the streets, shouting her name, not as a heretic, but as a hero reborn. Yet even in vindication, her story remained incomplete. The church had absolved her, but time had not yet sanctified her. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. But Jeanne's name endured, whispered by revolutionaries, invoked by kings, painted by artists, and sung by poets. During the French Revolution, her image was carried by those who sought liberty. They saw in her a symbol not of monarchy, but of the people's divine right to fight oppression. In the 19th century, Napoleon III commissioned statues of her, hoping to claim her legacy for his empire. Yet the people knew Jeanne did not belong to kings. She belonged to France itself. Writers like Voltaire mocked her faith, yet even he could not erase her light. The poet Schiller called her a saint of the sword. Mark Twain, centuries later, would write of her with awe, calling her the most extraordinary person the human race has ever produced. Across time, she became more than flesh. She became idea. A flame in the human soul that refused to go out. In 1896, Pope Leo XIII opened her cause for sainthood. It was not politics now, but faith that sought to honor her. Her canonization took years. The church, once her enemy, now moved with reverence. On May 16, 1920, in St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope declared Joan of Arc a saint of the Catholic Church. The bells of France rang again, echoing across the centuries, this time not for mourning, but for triumph. In Rouen, the city that had once burned her, a church was built in her honor, its roof shaped like a rising flame. Pilgrims came from across the world to stand where she had stood, to pray where she had prayed, to remember what courage truly means. The same hands that once lit her pyre now carved her image in stone. The same soil that once drank her ashes now bloomed with lilies, the flower of France, the flower of purity. Statues of her were raised in every major city, Paris, New Yorker, London, Quebec. In each, her gaze was upward, eternal, fearless, and full of grace. Artists painted her visions, a girl surrounded by light, her armor gleaming like the dawn. Musicians composed symphonies inspired by her faith. Writers told her story anew, each generation finding in her a mirror for their own battles. During World War I, French soldiers carried her image into the trenches. They called her our maid, believing she watched over them. In 1916, a soldier wrote home from Verdun. When the shells fall, I whisper her name. It gives me courage. Even beyond religion, she became a symbol for all who dared to stand alone against the impossible. Feminists hailed her as the first woman warrior of conviction. Christians revered her as a saint. Humanists saw in her the embodiment of integrity. Her name crossed oceans, languages, and ideologies. The spirit of Jeanne d'Arc belonged not to one nation, but to all who believed in faith without fear. In modern France, her feast day, May 30th, is celebrated with parades and prayers. Children dress in armor and carry banners bearing her cross. Churches hold vigils by candlelight. And in Rouen, on that same day, the bells ring once more, their echoes mingling with the river's whisper as if the Seine itself still carries her name. In Domremy, her birthplace, the fields remain quiet, yet locals swear that sometimes, in the golden light of dusk, they see a girl walking among the wheat, her armor glinting faintly before she fades into mist. Perhaps it is imagination, or perhaps the soul of Jeanne has never truly left her home. For her story was not one of conquest, but of faith. Faith that turns a simple girl into legend. And legend, once born, never dies. She stood against kings and armies, against her own church, and even against her own fear. She proved that obedience to conscience can be mightier than obedience to men. She became the embodiment of purity in corruption, light in darkness, courage in despair. History has remembered countless warriors, but few who fought without hatred, without greed, without... Jeanne's war was not for power, but for purpose. Her battle was not for land, but for the soul of a nation. And though her life ended in flames, her message endured that divine conviction can change the course of history. Every era finds its own version of Joan. In times of chaos, she becomes the voice of faith. In times of tyranny, the face of rebellion. Artists reinvent her, but her essence never changes. The peasant girl who listened to heaven and dared to obey. Her legend reminds us that strength is not found in armies, but in the quiet certainty of belief. In the heart of every generation that stands for truth, Joan of Arc is reborn. For some, she is a saint. For others, a hero. For all, she is proof that a single voice can move the world. The centuries may have buried her body, but her name remains immortal, carved in stone, sung in hymns, whispered in prayers. Her courage transcended kingdoms. Her faith outlasted her enemies. Her fire became eternal. It is said that heaven chose her because she was simple, because in simplicity, truth shines bright. And perhaps that is her greatest legacy, not that she conquered France, but that she conquered fear. When the world burns around us, we remember Jeanne standing in the fire, unafraid. Her eyes fixed on the sky, her lips moving in prayer, her spirit unbroken. The same flames that consumed her body became the torch that lit the path for humanity. She showed that conviction can outlast corruption, that innocence can defy evil, and that faith, even when tested by fire, can remain pure. Jeanne's life is more than history, it is testimony. To believe when others doubt, to stand when others fall, to speak when silence is demanded. Her trial was meant to destroy her, but it became her greatest sermon. The words she spoke before her judges still echo across centuries. I fear nothing, for God is with me. That single sentence has outlived the names of every man who condemned her. Because truth, once spoken with faith, cannot be burned. The woman they tried to erase became immortal, not through power, but through purity. Today, her statues watch over cities, her story fills books, her courage fuels hearts. She has become what no fire could consume, the eternal flame of faith. To study Joan of Arc is to confront the question that burns at the core of every soul. Would I stand as she did? Few would. But because she did, humanity remembers that it is possible. Her memory stands as both mirror and challenge to live not for comfort, but for conviction. In every age, there comes a moment when the world demands courage. And when that moment comes, it is her name that whispers through the flames. Jeanne, they say softly, give me your strength. And somewhere, Beyond the veil of time, her spirit answers not with words, but with light. The fire she left behind still burns in the hearts of the brave. It is the fire of truth, of purpose, of unyielding belief. And though centuries separate us, her presence feels close, as if the very air carries the warmth of her soul. For Joan of Arc never truly died. She lives wherever faith stands, defiant against fear. Her armor may have turned to dust, but her courage remains eternal. Her voice, once silenced by flame, still sings through time. Have faith. Be strong! Do not yield! Her story began in a humble village, but it ends in every heart that dares to believe. The girl who once followed voices became the voice that history will never silence. And as the centuries pass, her light grows brighter, a beacon to all who walk through darkness. She is the saint of the steadfast, the guardian of the faithful, the spirit of courage itself. And when the world forgets what it means to stand for truth, her name returns like a prayer. Jeanne d'Arc. 2 words that still carry the power to move mountains, to ignite hearts, to remind humanity of its divine strength. She was born of earth, guided by heaven, tested by fire, and crowned by eternity. Her legend belongs not to France alone, but to all who have ever dared to believe that faith can change destiny. For the fire that took her was never a punishment, it was her ascension. And through that fire, she became what few ever do. Not just remembered, but revered. Jeanne d'Arc, the girl who burned for truth, and in doing so, lit the soul of the world forever.